He stood in front of the nation and did what powerful men always do when they feel threatened. He tried to humiliate her. "You're a liar," Trump spat, as if the louder he said it, the more it would stick. The room didn't just tense, it turned electric. But she didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She didn't need to, because while he screamed, she loaded a weapon more dangerous than any insult. A single story, forged in truth, sharpened by history, and aimed straight at the hollow chest of performative power. And when she spoke, the show stopped. The act collapsed. The so-called strong man was exposed not by fury, but by fact. What you're about to hear is not a transcript. It's not a leaked memo or a hidden camera reel. It's a dramatized reconstruction inspired by real confrontations, real silencing, real history. The names are public, the emotions are personal, and the lessons are unforgettable. Because this isn't about politics, it's about patterns. And how one woman with nothing but a voice and a memory decided that the cycle ends right here. So if you think you know how this story ends, think again. If you think truth needs permission to speak, you're about to learn different. He called her a liar. She rewrote the damn narrative. And by the time it ended, America wasn't looking at him. They were listening to her. It was the kind of silence that hums, heavy, electric, charged with something unspoken and waiting to explode. The congressional hearing room wasn't just full, it was tense, almost theatrical. But this wasn't theater. This was real. Cameras lined the back wall like bayonets. The press sat shoulder to shoulder, phones raised like shields, faces tight, waiting, hungry. Every movement, every breath, every glance could become a headline before it even finished happening. AOC sat at the long table, posture calm, pen in hand. She wasn't adjusting her microphone. She wasn't smoothing her blazer. She wasn't smiling. She was watching the man across from her prepare to do what he always did, perform rage, rewrite reality, and hope America would blink first. Then, without even pretending to warm the room, Trump leaned forward. His voice cracked sharp like a whip. "You're a liar and a disgrace to this institution." The words hit not like a punch, but like a detonator. You could feel the oxygen shift. One aide's jaw dropped. A Republican congressman smirked. Two press photographers gasped audibly. On the far left, a young staffer whispered something to her neighbor, and both froze, eyes wide. No one knew what to do. Not yet. Because that line wasn't just rude, it wasn't just political, it was strategic, calculated, a direct shot at legitimacy. And he said it with such trained familiarity, as if he had said those exact words before, and gotten away with them every time. AOC didn't flinch, she didn't move. But inside, something tightened. Not out of fear, out of precision. Because when you're a woman of color in rooms like this, you learn early that the moment you blink, they rewrite your character. She had been called worse, by lesser men, with larger microphones. What Trump didn't understand, or maybe did and counted on, was that liar isn't just a word when it's lobbed like a grenade in a room full of men wearing blue suits and red ties. It's a label designed to erase. It's an accusation meant to out-volume the truth. And it landed not just on AOC's lap, it echoed across every woman in that room who had ever been called too emotional, too ambitious, too loud, or not qualified. Within 60 seconds, Twitter began to froth. AOC vs. Trump, she or she did not flinch. Say her truth. Millions of phones lit up as if on cue. Clip editors scrambled. Hashtags spread faster than context. But this wasn't the first time Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez had been told to sit down, to stay quiet, or to apologize for having a spine. And every time before, she'd chosen something different. She'd chosen to stay exactly where she was. Trump, chest puffed, scanned the room with that familiar smugness. The look of a man who thought the cameras were on him. What he didn't know was that history never follows the spotlight. It follows the silence that comes right after. The part when no one knows what's about to happen next. And that's exactly where we are. Not in the explosion, but in the tension afterward. Because this isn't just a clash of parties. This is a collision of eras, one powered by noise, the other by nerve. So don't blink, don't scroll, because the next words out of her mouth won't just answer the insult. They'll burn through the very script he's used to control the room for years. And when she speaks, it won't just be to defend herself. It will be to remind America why some women don't just survive history, they rewrite it. Time didn't stop when he said it, but it sure as hell slowed down. Everything around her, the tapping of pens, the shuffle of papers, the almost imperceptible gasp of a staffer in the third row, blurred into silence. Not because the room went quiet, but because her mind had heard that word before. Many times, too many times. It didn't arrive like a surprise. It arrived like a pattern. Liar! He said it loud, like it was final, like it was fact. But in that moment, as she sat still while a former president tried to bury her with a single syllable, her mind did what it always does when the fire comes close. It rewound. It took her to the House floor 3 years ago when a congressman muttered behind her as she walked past, "She reads like a script, not like she means it." The press ran with it. The headline said she was performative. Twitter exploded, and she, as always, kept her head high, even as pundits chewed at her sincerity like it was political candy. Then it took her further back, to her first campaign, when she debated an opponent twice her age who called her irresponsible, out of touch, and naive. She won that race by 15 points, but she remembered how the room shifted when he threw that word, unqualified. It was never about the policy. It was always about the permission to exist. And even further, not in Washington, not in public, but in college, in a classroom full of white men quoting Milton Friedman like gospel as she challenged the morality of capital before profit. One of them chuckled and said, "You're not stupid, you're just emotional." She remembered how her professor let the moment slide, how she sat in silence, fists clenched under the desk, how she swore, "Never again will I let their comfort overwrite my clarity." So now when Trump tossed out liar, she didn't hear a new insult. She heard a recycled weapon. She heard a history of men in suits who could not handle the truth unless they owned it. And she knew, deep in the marrow of her spine, that what he really meant wasn't "you lie," but "you're not supposed to be the one telling the truth." Because when a woman like her, in a body like hers, speaks truth to power, they don't fact-check her. They frame her. She looked at him, face still blank, heart beating even, and thought, "He called me a liar." But that word doesn't belong to him. It belongs to history. History where women were called witches for being too intelligent, where truth was rewritten in back rooms before it ever reached classrooms, where survivors were told their memory was hysteria, where truth-tellers were labeled radicals just to shut the door on their credibility. She had been here before, not this room maybe, but this moment. And she knew the rules of this freeze frame, the ones they don't print in congressional manuals or political playbooks. Don't react too fast or you're impulsive. Don't wait too long or you're unsure. Don't look angry. Don't look smug. Don't look like a victim. But she wasn't following their script. She never had. She took a breath, not because she was shaken, but because she was choosing the exact moment to detonate. Not with volume, but with vision. Not with force, but with story. Because when the world tries to frame you in a freeze, you learn to melt the damn frame from the inside out. And that's exactly what she was about to do. AOC didn't flinch, not even a blink. Trump's words still echoed in the chamber. Venomous, theatrical, the kind of insult tossed like red meat to a waiting crowd. But she didn't bite. Not yet. Instead, she looked around, slowly, deliberately. Some eyes stared back with contempt. Tired men in navy suits clutching old playbooks. Others darted away, unsure whether to align or retreat. There were glimmers of quiet solidarity, too. A raised eyebrow, a clenched jaw, a nod just sharp enough to be a warning. Not yet, but soon. And then there were the opportunists, always lurking. They weren't here for justice or truth. They were here for airtime, for a clip, a gotcha moment. Something they could splice into a 10-second hit piece with her face frozen mid-syllable. But she didn't care. Not today. Today wasn't about playing their game. It was about ending it. She leaned back slightly, arms crossed, not closed, but calculating. There was an old saying her father taught her when she was a girl, trying to understand why some people always yelled while others won. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. And right now her silence was a siren. Trump was still talking, still throwing matches like he expected a fire. But the wood was wet. Nothing burned, not yet. He mistook her quiet for retreat, for weakness, for uncertainty. He didn't see it for what it really was, a strategy. Inside her mind, the gears were moving, clicking into place like clockwork. Every phrase he used was familiar, recycled from men like him, who had power, lost it, and now couldn't stomach the sight of someone who wasn't supposed to survive the system beating it. Liar, dangerous, radical. He was drawing from the same dusty dictionary America's most fragile leaders had always reached for when someone dared to be young, bold, and female, and refused to wait her turn. She remembered something else. The first time she ever stepped into that chamber, the architecture overwhelmed her. Not the marble or the arches, but the weight of centuries, of systems built to look timeless so they could delay justice forever. But this wasn't about her, not fully. This was about every girl who'd been taught to speak softer, sit still, smile more. Every activist who'd been followed home, misquoted, sidelined. Every working-class kid who learned politics wasn't about people. It was about power dressing itself up as principle. She breathed in, not deeply, just enough. The moment was coming, and she knew it wasn't going to be a debate. It would be a reckoning. He wanted spectacle. She brought scripture. He wanted barbs. She brought ballast. He wanted a stage. But she came with a shovel and history's old bones to bury. The room began to settle. Even Trump's voice, booming just moments before, began to waver under the weight of her silence. Like he could feel the temperature drop. Like he realized too late that she hadn't been ignoring him. She'd been measuring him. And when she stood, not fast, not slow, just certain, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because she hadn't come to spar. She had come to bury something. He wanted a fight, she would later say. But I came for a funeral. The funeral of an old lie. Before the chamber, before the cameras, before they called her radical, loud, divisive, there was a little girl sitting at a too small desk in a too cold classroom in the Bronx. She raised her hand too often, asked too many questions, used words that didn't match her age, or at least not the version of it that made teachers comfortable. It was middle school, 7th grade, a history assignment about conflict and resolution. Most kids wrote about the Civil War, the Boston Tea Party, maybe something they saw in a textbook. But Alexandria wrote about her neighborhood, about the way her friend's brother got pulled over for walking while brown. She wrote about the way her mom clutched her purse tighter when a police car rolled by. She wrote about how the teachers never called on the Dominican girls, even when they waved their hands until their arms ached. She turned it in thinking it was the best thing she'd ever written. What she got back wasn't a grade. It was a note scrawled in red ink across the top. Too dramatic. Stick to the facts. That was the first time she realized the truth could get you punished. And not just punished, dismissed. Because what they called dramatic, she called daily life. She remembered going home, sitting on the floor of her bedroom, looking at that paper. She didn't cry, not then. But something sank, something heavy. Not just because a teacher doubted her, but because it was the first time she saw how power hides in politeness, how a red pen can silence just as much as a slammed door. And the worst part, that teacher wasn't cruel. She smiled. She meant well. That's what made it so confusing. They don't always burn your voice with fire. Sometimes they freeze it with a smile. Still, Alexandria didn't stop writing. She started keeping journals, not of dreams, but receipts, names, dates, questions no one would answer. Her notebooks became weapons, quiet ones, but sharp. She learned early, in rooms where you're not supposed to exist, your voice isn't just inconvenient, it's dangerous. But danger, she would discover, is just fear in a mask. and they were afraid. Not of what she said, but of what it might unlock. Because when a girl from the Bronx starts naming injustice, others start seeing it too. That was the real threat. She would carry that paper with her for years. Not the physical sheet, but the sentence. Too dramatic. It echoed every time she stood up and someone rolled their eyes. Every time a headline used the word rant. Every time a man twice her age tried to tell her how the world really works. She didn't forget. She refused to forget. Because that classroom wasn't a one-time thing. It was the first domino in a line that stretched all the way to Congress. AOC smiles sometimes when they mock her now. The voice, the passion, the refusal to shrink. Because what they still don't understand is, she was trained in rooms that never wanted her to speak. Her strength wasn't born on a stage. It was built in silence. And the girl they once called too dramatic, she became the woman who made America listen. They didn't say it outright, not at first. Washington doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "Stay in your lane." She remembered the first time those words hit her inbox, right after her first televised committee hearing. She had quoted an economic study on income inequality, cited labor participation rates, asked why billionaires paid a lower effective tax rate than the janitors who cleaned their offices. They didn't argue her numbers. They didn't question her logic. They questioned her tone. Too sharp, too aggressive, too confident for someone so new. Translation? She wasn't supposed to know that much. She wasn't supposed to sound like she belonged. And when she did, when she used data instead of deference, when she named the greed, called out the rot, spoke without apology, the mask slipped. Not hers, theirs. Because this town, for all its suits and ceremony, is built on one quiet rule. Don't remind power of its reflection. AOC wasn't a disruption because she made mistakes. She was a disruption because she didn't make the expected ones. They were ready for a loudmouth. They weren't ready for a mirror. She would stand at the mic and say something obvious. That working class people deserve health care. That student debt was an economic anchor. That Wall Street's influence corrupted policy. And suddenly the room would tighten. Not because it wasn't true, but because it was too true. She remembered a colleague, older, smug, always adjusting his tie like it was a badge of authority, interrupting her mid-sentence. "You've got a lot to learn, Congresswoman." But she wasn't there to learn how to play dead. She was there to learn where the bones were buried. And every time they called her uninformed, she sharpened her research. Every time they called her divisive, she connected more dots. Every time they called her angry, she smiled, because the real emotion in the room wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of what she represented. AOC wasn't just young. She wasn't just Latina. She wasn't just from the Bronx. She was unbought. And in Washington, that's rare enough to be radioactive. The lobbyists didn't know how to approach her. She didn't owe them favors. She didn't dine in their circles or depend on their donors. And when they couldn't control her, they tried to discredit her. But what they missed, what they always miss, is that people like her don't come from nothing. They come from truth, from the kind of honesty you can't fake in a soundbite. Because power doesn't fear mistakes, it fears mirrors. And that's what she was, a mirror they couldn't break because every crack only reflected more of them. They threw the usual tactics at her, misquotes, smear pieces, out of context clips, eye rolls on the House floor. But all of it, every attempt to reduce her, only made people look closer. And the closer they looked, the more they saw what Washington wanted to hide. She wasn't there to fit in. She was there to make sure the next girl who looked like her didn't have to ask permission. And by the time they realized that, it was too late. The mirror had already spoken. It didn't start with her. And deep down, the room knew it. AOC looked out at the audience, not to impress them, but to remind them. Remind them of a pattern stitched into the American fabric, invisible to those who benefit, unforgettable to those who bleed. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Shirley Chisholm. A pause, a pulse in the room. Unbought and unbossed. The first black woman in Congress. They called her too loud, too bold, said she was dreaming too big. But she ran for president anyway. The crowd leaned in. Anita Hill, put on trial for speaking the truth, called everything but a child of God, all because she dared to say what powerful men didn't want to hear. Her tone sharpened, not in volume, but in edge. Truth has its own gravity when spoken with clarity. Maxine Waters, decades in service, decades under fire, told to shut up, told to be grateful, but she never backed down, not once. They called her angry, but she was focused. She let the names settle like seeds falling onto hard ground, not shouted, but planted. Because this wasn't performance. This was memory. She wasn't giving a speech. She was calling a roll. One by one, the pattern revealed itself. And the message wasn't subtle. They call you emotional when you're passionate, unstable when you're honest, dangerous when you refuse to be quiet. Every woman who ever stood up in public and said, "This is wrong," had felt it. The instant backlash, the media framing, the smirking men behind microphones, the cold silence after the heat. It was never just about her. It was about what she represented. AOC wasn't the first to be dismissed, discredited, or disrespected, but she was part of a long and defiant lineage, a living thread that stretched through centuries of denial, distortion, and deliberate erasure. And here's the terrifying part for the establishment. Each time they tried to cut that thread, another woman picked it up. "You see," she said, now locking eyes with the press in the room, "this story isn't new. It's not even shocking. It's just that this time, you're forced to watch it live." She pointed, not at anyone in particular, but at everyone who ever rolled their eyes at a survivor, dismissed a working-class woman as too mouthy, silenced a girl in school for raising her hand too often. Because silence, too, is policy, and every policy has a pattern. They always say the same things. She's lying. She wants attention. She's misremembering. She's making it political. But they never ask why the same story keeps repeating with different names. They never admit that maybe, just maybe, the system was designed to bury these voices from the start. But truth doesn't stay buried forever. They called them liars to erase their truth, she said, her voice like flint scraping steel. But truth, like a seed, grows in silence. The room was still, because they knew what came next. Silence is where roots form, and roots crack concrete. He swaggered back to the mic like it was a throne, not a piece of public equipment. Trump had the grin of a man who'd rehearsed in the mirror, counted the cameras, memorized the applause lines. He didn't speak. He performed, boasting about poll numbers like he invented math, belittling opponents with schoolyard taunts, tossing nicknames like rotten fruit, waiting for the press to bite. He smirked as if history had already handed him the crown. And for a moment, the room played along. They always do. AOC didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise a brow or shift in her seat. She let him run the scene like it was amateur night at a broken theater. Because here's the truth. He needs the show. He needs the lights, the audience, the applause, even the mockery. It feeds the persona, the myth of invincibility, of dominance, of inevitability. But what he didn't know is that she wrote the script. Every smug punchline he hurled, she had studied before. Every smirk, every jab, every puffed-up laugh, none of it surprised her. She'd grown up surrounded by people who mocked what they couldn't control. And Trump was just the expensive, orange-tinted version. AOC understood the rhythm. She knew the psychology. Theatrics were his oxygen. But silence? Silence is a mirror, and bullies can't breathe when they're forced to look at themselves. He called her radical. She let it sit. He mocked her background. She kept watching. He said she hated America. She smiled. Because this wasn't about her. It was about his fear that someone like her could rise unbought and unbowed in a system he thought he owned. He's loud because silence terrifies him, she would later say. He performs because truth is too quiet to control. Every second he spent talking was a second he wasn't listening, and that was her advantage. She didn't need to be louder, just clearer, more precise, sharper, because thorns don't scream, they cut. So she waited, patiently, letting the stage lights blind him to his own unraveling. The cameras loved him, but the crowd had changed. The room was shifting. The country was shifting. They were starting to yawn between his punchlines. That's what he never saw coming. The bully performing for an audience too scared to yawn. She didn't have to raise her voice. She just had to raise the stakes. And when she finally stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, like someone who knows exactly what she's about to do, he paused. Just for a second. Just long enough to realize the script wasn't his anymore. "You finished?" she asked, cool and calm, her voice cutting through the static like a blade through fog. Because in this theater, he wasn't the director. He was the cautionary tale. And she was the rewrite. Silence is not retreat. It's a weapon. And like any weapon, it demands precision. While Trump rambled on about loyalty and legacy, dancing in his own echo chamber, AOC didn't move. Her eyes locked, her hands still. Because behind her silence was something he had never mastered: timing. She'd learned it the hard way, not from a classroom, but from life. In rooms where her ideas were dismissed until a man repeated them. On panels where she was interrupted, then mocked for not speaking up. At hearings where a pause was read as weakness. But she was never weak. She was loading. They say women should speak faster to be heard, louder to be respected, sharper to be taken seriously. But no one tells men to listen better. No one tells them what to do with a woman who waits, not out of fear, but out of fire. AOC had spent years studying the difference between impulsive talk and intentional voice, between noise and strategy, between heat and burn. And in that moment, standing before a man who thought volume could drown out truth, she let the silence stretch, let it sting, let it make peep. Because discomfort is where growth begins. He mistook her stillness for surrender. They always do. Loud men always mistake quiet women for weak, as if thunder is stronger than lightning just because it makes more noise. But thunder warns, lightning strikes. Inside, she wasn't hesitating. She was sharpening. Her thoughts, her stance, her words. Not rehearsing, refining. Not scared, studying. Because when a woman knows the world is waiting for her to fail, she doesn't stumble into her moment. She calculates it, she owns it. She makes sure it lands. AOC had nothing to prove to Trump, but she had something to show the country. What patience looks like when it's pointed like a blade. So when she finally opened her mouth, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly, it wasn't just a reply. It was the release of every lesson silence had taught her. "Men like to talk about strength," she said later, "but real strength is knowing when to shut up and watch." She understood the power of letting your opponent burn out their own fuel. Let them run the engine hot. Let them talk themselves raw. And when they collapse into their own arrogance, that's when you speak. "A woman who waits to speak is not scared," she had once told a younger activist. "She's preparing to destroy." And now all eyes were on her. Trump had said his piece. The crowd had chuckled. The cameras had eaten up his theatrics. But the silence AOC left hanging? It echoed louder. Because people remember noise, sure. But they feel stillness. They replay the moment she didn't flinch. The second she didn't blink. The breath before she broke him open with a sentence. And that's the difference between a showman and a strategist. One performs for applause. The other prepares for legacy. It was coming. You could feel it in the tightening of his jaw, in the way his hand gripped the edge of the podium, like a man losing balance but pretending to dance. Trump had spent the last 20 minutes puffing his chest, name-dropping poll numbers, and swinging insults like a bat in the dark, hoping something, anything, would land. Then he snapped, "You don't belong here!" The room didn't just fall silent. It imploded. Gasps scattered like sparks across the chamber. Some mouths hung open, some heads dropped. But one reaction cracked louder than all the rest. A sharp inhale from a freshman congresswoman, barely visible behind her binder. Her eyes widened like someone who had just watched lightning strike too close. She wasn't alone. Every woman in that room knew what had just happened. Not an insult, a revelation. And in the center of it all, AOC didn't blink. She smiled, not because she was amused, but because she was ready. That sentence wasn't a slip, it was a confession, a crack in the mask. And in that crack, the truth had poured out like smoke from an engine on fire. He just proved my point for me, she thought. Loud and clear. Mic's still on. There it was, the raw, exposed root of the whole game. It was never really about taxes or trade deals, not about decorum or procedure. It was about space, about territory, about the gates they guard and the people they think shouldn't be allowed to enter. Not just her, people like her. He didn't say she was wrong. He didn't argue on merit. He didn't counter her facts or challenge her policies. He went for the one thing every gatekeeper returns to when they feel power slipping: belonging. Because when you can't win the argument, you try to erase the person making it. Trump had screamed what millions whisper every day, in boardrooms, in border towns, on ballots, and behind burning keyboards. This was never meant to be yours. But AOC knew something he didn't. Belonging isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. Every time you speak up, every time you're underestimated, every time they try to box you out and you break the damn walls instead. The energy in the room flipped. Reporters looked up from their phones. C-SPAN staffers sat forward in their chairs. Even a few of Trump's own allies stiffened. Not out of disagreement, but fear. Fear that his mask had slipped. Fear that, for once, the monster wasn't a metaphor. AOC didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to clap back. The power wasn't in what she said. It was in what he had said. Because once a man tells the world exactly who he is, the world doesn't forget. He wanted to call her an outsider, but in doing so, he handed her the map. Because only those who fear the future try to gatekeep the present, and only those who know they're losing grip scream loudest about who gets to stay. So she stood tall, taller than the name-calling, taller than the headlines, taller than every man who ever used belonging like a sword. And in that moment, she didn't just hold her ground, she expanded it. The applause fades fast in this town. One minute you're lighting up the chamber, the next you're unlocking your office door in silence. I walked back alone. No cameras, no aides, no noise. Just the click of my heels and the echo of everything I didn't say. My office lights flickered on like they, too, were reluctant to see me. The same four walls, the same chair with the rip on the side, the same desk that once felt too big for me and now, somehow, feels too small for what I carry. I sat. I breathed. Then I opened the drawer. The one with the letters. Yes, I keep them. Not for motivation. Not exactly. More like record keeping. Evidence of the battle they pretend isn't real. I pulled out a random one. Scrawled angry ink. You should have stuck to pouring drinks, sweetheart. Another. You're not even American. Go back. And another, the kind that doesn't come in all caps, but somehow cuts sharper. You're what's wrong with this country. I don't cry when I read these. I used to. Now I just catalog them, like receipts. Not for revenge, for remembrance. I need to remember what I'm fighting, who I'm fighting, and why they fight so hard to keep the world unchanged. But then, something different. A ding from my phone. A text from Mom. Mija, please be safe. They don't fight fair. And just like that, I felt it. The weight. Not from the letters, but from her words. The kind of weight you don't show on C-SPAN. The kind that hums behind your ribs when you're smiling at a hearing. The kind that whispers at night when no one else sees you bleed. Because every warrior bleeds off the battlefield. They just do it quietly. I leaned back, stared at the ceiling like it might have answers. Then I whispered to myself, not out loud, not for drama, but the kind of whisper meant to steady a ship rocking too hard. This is what they want. They want me tired. They want me to go home. They want me to doubt. And then I laughed. Software bitter, familiar. They still think I'm here for the job. That I ran for Congress like it was a promotion. They don't get it. I didn't fight to be a politician. I fought because I was tired of watching politicians decide my life without knowing a damn thing about it. I glanced back at the messages. One line keeps blinking in my head like a strobe. Go back to bartending. You know what's funny? I miss it sometimes. The noise, the late nights, the realness. Back then, the worst thing I had to wipe off a counter was spilled beer. Not spit-laced hatred from men in $1,000 suits. But I also remember the women who tipped in coins and whispered, "Keep going," like it was a blessing. And I remember why I left, because no one with a voice like mine was at the table, and I didn't come this far just to make a speech. I came to flip the table if I had to. So I sit up straighter. I gather the letters. I tuck them back in the drawer, not out of fear, but because they're fuel now. Cold, bitter, efficient fuel. Then I text Mom back. "I know, Mommy, but I'm not scared. I'm getting ready." Ready for what? For tomorrow. Because the mic will still be on. And they've still got no idea who they're dealing with. The room was still angry, still heavy. I reached for something, anything, that didn't reek of today's bile. My fingers brushed against the spine of a worn book on the shelf, its cover faded but firm. The Life of Fannie Lou Hamer. I hadn't opened it in months, maybe years, not since that first wild, trembling campaign, when I was still knocking on doors with blistered feet and borrowed faith. But something in me said now. Something in me needed reminding. I cracked it open. Pages curled with time. Ink bled by sweat. A yellow highlighter blinked back at me like a flare. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. There it was. Not a slogan. Not a meme. A battle cry wrapped in fatigue. I exhaled. Long, quiet, deep. The kind of breath that pulls you back into your skin. And suddenly I was there again. Queens, 2018. The first time someone laughed in my face when I said I was running. The first time someone told me, "Sweetheart, you don't have the look." The first time I realized people don't just fight you. They erase you before you even step on the field. They called me a bartender like it was a slur, like service was shameful. But what they didn't understand, what they still don't, is that I listened more behind that counter than half of them do in a committee room. I learned how pain walks, how dreams crack, how the working poor hold on with fingernails and prayer. And they thought I'd crumble the first time a headline called me radical. Radical? No, honey. I'm rooted. Rooted in the women who bled before they spoke, who stood when their knees buckled, who fought not for applause, but because they were too awake to sleep through injustice. I turned another page. Another quote underlined, "Nobody's free until everybody's free." And just like that, I remembered why I came, why I stayed, why after all the venom and smears and death threats disguised as tweets, I didn't pack my bags and go back to bartending. Because the job was never about comfort. It was about confrontation. I whispered aloud, "Not for the room, but for the ghosts. Then why am I still here?" And the silence answered, not empty this time. Full of every march, every voice, every ancestor who never made it to this mic but handed me the script. They say memory fades. No, memory fuels. Not the kind you scroll through on a phone, but the kind that burns in your marrow. The kind that shows up when the spotlight dims and no one's clapping. The kind that whispers, "Get up." Because if Fanny could keep going with busted ribs and no ballot to cast, then what's my excuse? I don't need applause. I don't need trending clips. I need that page, that sentence, that fire. And suddenly I knew. The moment Trump barked, "You don't belong here," he wasn't threatening me. He was reminding me of how far we've come and how far they still want to push us back. I closed the book, but not the lesson. My soul didn't need a break. It needed a memory, so I stood up. Because the mic wasn't off. It was waiting. It started with a blank page. No headline, no hearing, no cameras, just silence and a pen. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but loaded. Like the breath before a scream or the pause before a verdict. I didn't plan to write it. The words just came, like smoke through a crack. Not for Congress, not for press. For her. The girl I know is coming. The next one they'll call angry. The next one they'll call dramatic. The next one they'll drag on live TV and call unfit, unstable, unworthy. The girl who'll be mocked for simply feeling something. Or worse, knowing something. So I wrote to her. They'll say you're too loud. Say it louder. Let them flinch. You weren't born to whisper. I paused, pen hovering over the paper. Because I remember every time they told me to smile more, to calm down, to play nice. I remember being told that fire was unbecoming on a woman, especially a young one, especially a brown one, especially me. But here's the truth they fear. Composure has never protected us. It's only made them comfortable. So I kept writing. They'll say you're ungrateful. Good. Thank them for the fear they feel. That fear? That's the sound of power shifting. I meant every word. Because when a woman stands with her full voice, they don't hear her opinion. They hear a threat to the script they wrote without her. And when they can't erase you, they'll try to reduce you to a meme, a tantrum, a headline. They'll accuse you of seeking attention while they mic you up and air your tears nationwide. They'll call you a liar, but they won't call you wrong. So I told her, you are not here to be believed. You are here to be undeniable. Let them question your tone, your timing, your intent. Let them dissect your pain like it's up for public debate. But don't you dare shrink. Don't you dare apologize for the weight of your own story. They didn't build this world for your truth. That's why it shakes when you speak. So speak. They'll call you divisive. Let them. A mirror feels violent to those hiding behind masks. They'll say you're making it about you. Smile. That means they heard you. And when they say you don't belong, understand, that's not rejection. That's recognition. You've already cracked something open they can't close. Your job isn't to be palatable. Your job is to be a problem for the people who profit from silence. I stared at the letter. One page. One scream dressed as a whisper. No address. No date. Just fire and truth, folded in silence. I didn't send it. Didn't need to. Because maybe she doesn't need a letter. Maybe she's already writing her own. Maybe her silence is just waiting to roar. But I left the page there, tucked beneath my old campaign flyers, behind a photo of me with my mother, the one who told me never to fear being too much in a world that's always demanded we be less. I never signed the letter, because I knew it wasn't mine to finish. The gavel hit once, twice, silence. In a room filled with names that made headlines and hands that signed wars into existence, I asked for the floor, not to argue, not to strike, not to match insult with fire, but to speak. And for once, they listened. There's a power in not starting with the name everyone's waiting to hear. That name can wait. He can wait. Because today the story is bigger than him. I want to tell you all about a woman, I said. She didn't sit in this room, but she sat in another. Metal folding chair, Mississippi Courthouse, 1964. Her name was Fannie Lou Hamer. And the moment I said it, I saw some eyes glaze, some squint, some hands shift beneath tables, pretending to scroll through files, but really just avoiding a history they never bothered to learn. Because what does a poor black woman from Mississippi have to do with this hearing? With this America? Everything. She stood up when they told her to sit down, spoke out when silence would have kept her safe. She was called too poor, too uneducated, too emotional, too black, too female, too angry. Sound familiar? They beat her, in jail. Broke her ribs, her dignity, and still couldn't break her voice. And when they finally let her speak, on a national stage no less, they cut the broadcast, cut her off, but she didn't flinch, she didn't shrink. She said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And what hit me that day, as I read those words again alone in my office, hands shaking over her photo, was this. If they were brave enough to call her dangerous, then I must be doing something right. Because every woman who dares to stand, dares to speak, dares to exist without apology, we inherit her microphone. And the room was still. No heckling, no interruptions. Even the ones who loved to scoff leaned forward, ever so slightly. They didn't know where I was going. That's the trick. You lead them with a whisper before you deliver the thunder. So when you call us angry, when you say we're out of line, I think of her. Because this country has always had a problem with women who don't ask for permission to exist. They called Hamer a problem, just like they've called every woman who said enough. The truth is, it's not anger they fear, it's memory. Because memory keeps receipts. Memory doesn't flinch. And I'll be damned if I let this hearing pass without honoring the shoulders I stand on. You see, when I speak, it's not just me speaking. It's the field hands they tried to silence with cotton in their mouths. It's the students they locked out with red lines and back doors. It's the mothers who gave birth to change in kitchens and basements and church pews. I'm not here alone. I am one voice, carrying generations. And as I looked around the room, something shifted. Maybe not in their hearts, but in their posture. You can always tell when a story hits bone, when even the ones who disagree can't deny the weight. Because once you name Fannie Lou Hamer in a room like this, every microphone changes. And I'll say this once more, not for applause, not for headlines, but for the girl watching this from her dorm, her job, her silence. You are not too much. You are just enough to make history uncomfortable. I stood there still holding the silence from Fannie Lou's name, but I wasn't done, because history doesn't just whisper, it echoes. And when you learn how to listen, really listen, you start to hear the same song played on different mouths across different decades. So I began to name them. Anita Hill. A pause. I watched some brows furrow. Good. Let the discomfort settle in. Let the air remember what it was like when a black woman sat before a room full of men and told the truth. And they called her a liar because the truth was inconvenient. Christine Blasey Ford. Not a flicker, not a word. Just that familiar stiffness, like truth was something they could sit through if they didn't blink. She said she remembered the laughter, not the faces, not the years, just the sound of boys laughing while they pinned her down. And we all remember how they laughed again, not behind closed doors, but in televised hearings, when they mocked her pain. Ilhan Omar, my sister in Congress. They said she was too foreign, too Muslim, too mouthy, too brown, too other. They threatened her life, twisted her words, and then asked her why she always sounded angry. And then I said the name that hit me harder than all of them. My mother. She never had a microphone, never stood in this chamber, but I watched her work jobs that broke her back and still get told she was asking for too much when she just wanted health care. I saw her sacrifice her rest, her youth, her voice, and get told she should smile more while being paid less. Different women, different decades, same accusations, same playbook. It's always the same. Call us liars, say we imagined it, question our tone, dissect our clothes, analyze our tears, and then, when we don't break, accuse us of being too resilient. They don't actually want us silent. They want us grateful for being allowed to speak at all. And that's where the lie lives. That's where it's always lived. Not in what they call us, not in the gaslighting or the outrage or the finger pointing or the headlines. The lie is that we ever needed their permission to be right. And when I said it, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to, because truth doesn't shout, it settles, it lingers. I looked them all in the eye one by one. Men who built careers off of interrupting women mid-sentence. Women who once knew the sting of silence, but chose comfort over courage. And then I turned my gaze toward the cameras, not for performance, but for precision, because this wasn't just for the record. This was for every girl who's been told calm down when she was already holding the storm back. For every woman who's been told you misunderstood when she finally named her harm. For every mother who taught her daughter to be soft, not because it was right, but because she feared softness was the only way the world would tolerate her. This hearing, this list, this moment, it isn't about revenge. It's about remembrance. We name them not to reopen wounds, but to make sure we never let them scab into silence again. Anita, Christine, Ilhan, my mother, and all the names we'll never know, because history didn't bother to write them down. Well, I'm writing them now, one by one, in permanent ink, and with every name, I'm building a wall of truth they'll never shout over again. There comes a moment, and you don't plan it, when the fear finally burns itself out. It doesn't vanish. It doesn't surrender. It simply gets outshined. I looked across that room, and there he was, Donald J. Trump, the man who had dodged truths his whole life like they were flies at a golf course, swatting, mocking, pretending they didn't land. He called me a liar. He did it on camera with smirked confidence, as if centuries of gaslighting had given him the right, as if my words, my presence, my ancestry were all up for debate. But something happens when the lies pile high enough to cast a shadow across your lineage. You stop ducking. You stop apologizing for the space you take up. You stand. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't pound the desk. I just looked him straight in the eye and I said, "You call me a liar, but I am not your first. I will be your last." There it was, the sentence that landed harder than any gavel in that chamber. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. And they knew it. For a moment, silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of reckoning, full of history, full of every woman who had ever been doubted by a man who called deceit, confidence, and cowardice power. The room didn't breathe. The chairperson shuffled their papers like maybe sound would protect them from the weight of the moment. A few staffers glanced toward the door, unsure if they should run or remember this. But no one spoke. Because when truth is that sharp, that unflinching, that undeniable, it doesn't invite rebuttal. It demands reflection, and then it happened. Not in the chamber, not from a headline, not even from the mouths of allies. It happened online. The clip, 13 seconds long, no music, no filter, went viral. Not because it was perfectly delivered, but because it was finally said. You could feel the air shift through a screen. You could hear the breath catch. And just beneath the silence, you could feel the fury turning into fuel. The hashtag lit up like wildfire. Number signed the pattern. People weren't just watching, they were witnessing. They stitched the video beside clips of other women, being cut off, being mocked, being questioned by men with less knowledge but more audacity. They started telling their own stories of classrooms, courtrooms, kitchens, boardrooms, where they too had been called liars for daring to speak truth. It wasn't about me anymore. It never really was. Because every system built to dismiss truth-tellers comes with a blueprint. They don't innovate. They recycle. They recycle shame. They recycle slander. They recycle the same tired script and pray we don't catch on. But we caught on. And when that verdict came, not from a court, but from a collective, it wasn't guilt or innocence we were deciding. It was whether silence would stay the status quo. I didn't need applause. I didn't need permission. I didn't even need agreement. I just needed to say it, plainly, clearly, without retreat. Because sometimes the most radical thing a woman can do in a room full of powerful men is not flinch. And sometimes the most powerful verdict isn't the one handed down, it's the one you declare. I used to think the world changed slowly, that it took years of organizing, decades of marching, centuries of waiting. Turns out, sometimes it only takes 13 seconds. 13 seconds of silence, 13 seconds of a truth that cuts so deep, it echoes louder than any scream. Within minutes of me stepping out of that chamber, my phone was buzzing like it was plugged straight into the grid. Mentions, DMs missed calls. Someone had clipped the moment. Just that one line, "I'm not your first. I will be your last." No context, no captions. It didn't need them. By the 1 hour mark, it had been shared over 1 million times. But that was just the surface ripple. The real storm was what came after. Twitter wasn't tweeting. People weren't arguing, they were aligning. Conservative women posted it with no hashtags, just ellipses and tears. Grandmothers in swing states quoted it next to pictures of their daughters in STEM. Black pastors shared it with Bible verses about truth and justice. Queer teens used it to clap back at school board bands. And then came the TikToks. Young girls lip-syncing the line like it was scripture. Old women nodding silently to the rhythm, tears in their eyes. One teenage boy in Oklahoma filmed himself walking out of history class, pulling up the video and saying to the camera, "This is what they don't want us to talk about." By the next morning, my inbox was flooded, but it wasn't congratulations. It was confessions. I stayed quiet when they lied about me. They called me aggressive when I stood up. They told me I was imagining it. And then, not anymore. Boomers wrote blogs, some in defense, many in awe. A retired teacher from Michigan penned an open letter saying, "I watched Anita Hill testify. I watched Christine Blasey Ford testify. This time, I watched my granddaughter watch." That's when I realized This wasn't about me. It was about recognition. Recognition of a pattern too long denied, of a gaslight so massive it stretched across generations, of a machine that wasn't broken. It was designed this way. And suddenly the usual rules stopped applying. Cable news didn't lead with the party lines. They led with reactions, because the usual panelists weren't enough to explain it. This wasn't about policy anymore. It was about presence, about someone standing in that room and refusing to play small just to be allowed to stay. People weren't just reposting, they were responding. Some started calling it a political moment. Others called it a feminist one. But the truth, it was a human one. Because every time someone tried to distort what I said, the people corrected it, loudly, collectively, like antibodies fighting off a decades-old virus. One viral tweet said it best. She didn't destroy him. She revealed him. And when the lie gets exposed to daylight, it doesn't just unravel, it evaporates. That's when I saw it. The shift. The moment the echo chamber cracked and became a megaphone. A single truth, when held in the light long enough, becomes contagious. It infects silence. It spreads into boardrooms, kitchens, classrooms. It makes people look up from their phones and say, wait, I've seen this before, and I stayed quiet. Not anymore. That's the real revolution. Not the moment we speak, the moment others start to. So no, I didn't win a debate. This wasn't a clapback. This was a call forward, and the replies, they weren't applause. They were alignment. They were awakening. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't just about surviving the moment. It was about redefining the future. One voice becomes 10, 10 become 10,000. And when truth moves like that, you can't interrupt it. You can only join it or be left behind. I used to think viral moments lived online, that truth existed in pixels and posts. But then the letters started coming. Not emails, not DMs, real letters. Folded, handwritten, smudged with ink or maybe tears. Some with stamps decades old, addresses scrawled in cursive like a whisper from another time. They came in stacks from every corner of the country, from names I'd never heard, stories I'd never known. But somehow they knew me. One from a retired teacher in Ohio. She didn't waste words. I called a girl like you a troublemaker once. I was wrong. Just that. No excuses, no explanations. And that was what hit hardest. Because I've been that girl, the one too loud in classrooms that demanded quiet, the one too passionate when all I did was refuse to pretend I didn't notice the lies, the one who got told, you'll understand when you're older, as if age was the cure for courage. Another letter, a shaky hand, blue ink on cream paper. My abuela says you speak like her soul does. That one stopped me. I read it again, slower this time. Her soul, not her opinion, not her mind. Her soul. Because some truths aren't taught, they're carried. Through blood, through grief, through silence that lasts generations until someone finally says, no mass. I opened another, from a single father in Kansas, a welder. Said he didn't follow politics until his daughter came home from school and showed him the clip. She asked me if men ever said those things to me. I said no. She asked if I believed you. I said yes. Then she hugged me like I'd just done something brave. Thank you for giving me that moment. Do you know what that does to a heart? Not headlines, moments, not theories, connection. These weren't just responses to a speech. They were echoes. Long-buried truths finally given permission to rise to the surface. And they kept coming. From a librarian in Tennessee who whispered her resistance through banned books. From a grandmother in Arizona who'd never written a letter in her life, but said she couldn't go to her grave without telling me I gave her hope. From a high school senior in Florida who ended her letter with, I used to think being Latina meant staying quiet to stay safe. Now I think it means speaking so loudly they can't pretend they didn't hear me. It was like watching a forest catch fire, not in destruction, but in illumination. A truth once whispered, now roaring through branches, lighting up what was once hidden. And somewhere in the middle of the pile was a note written on torn notebook paper. No name, no return address, just 7 words. You didn't speak for you. You spoke for me. That's when I realized, and this isn't about going viral. This is about going inward, into memory, into pain, into all the things we've been told not to name. Because when you name it, you claim it. When you speak it, you spread it. This wasn't a political movement. It was a reckoning, an invitation, a turning, a signal sent out to every girl ever labeled angry, difficult, too much. And now, they're writing back. Not to ask for permission, but to thank me for not asking for it either. And if even one of those letters ends up taped to a mirror, pinned on a dorm wall, tucked into a wallet for courage, then the moment was never mine alone. It belonged to all of us. Because real change isn't measured in votes or views. It's measured in letters that matter. And now, as I sit with pages inked by strangers who somehow know my fight like it's their own, I realize the truth doesn't just echo on screens, it knocks on hearts. And this time, hearts are opening. Legacy. It's a word they like to throw around in marble buildings and polished interviews, as if it's a trophy you earn by surviving the system long enough to have a library named after you. But I've always believed legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who picks up what you carried. That's what I was thinking when I walked into that cramped conference room where the interns waited. Folded chairs, nervous energy, notebooks open but untouched, and eyes, dozens of them, watching me not like I was a celebrity, but like I was a mirror. And then I saw her. She didn't speak, not right away. She sat in the back, shoulders tight, jaw clenched like the world had told her one more wrong move, and it's over. But her eyes held fire. The kind of fire you try to hide because you're scared it'll burn you before it ever lights the room. When I opened the floor for questions, most of them asked what you'd expect. Policy, advice, work-life balance. I answered honestly, I always do. But when I said, you don't have to sound like them to be heard, her eyes welled up. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a single tear, sliding down her cheek like truth, slipping past years of swallowing it. She stood, her voice cracked, but she didn't flinch. I watched that hearing. I saw myself, and I didn't look away. That's when I knew she got it. She got it in a way that no headline could capture, in a way that no campaign ad could ever fake. Because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about being recognized. I walked toward her. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. I hugged her, tight, and I whispered the only thing that made sense. Then we've already won. Because in that moment, she wasn't just watching history. She was it. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't shrink. She saw the mess, the chaos, the cruelty, and she stood up anyway. That's what legacy really means. Not perfection, participation. It's every girl who stops apologizing for having a voice that vibrates past the walls they built to silence her. It's every first-gen student who sits in a room full of names she can't pronounce and raises her hand anyway. It's every intern who doesn't laugh at the sexist joke, not because it's brave, but because it's not funny. That intern, she's going to change the world, and not because of me, but because someone once told her she couldn't, and she decided to try harder because of it. The goosebumps we felt in that room, they weren't about me. They were about what happens when truth meets courage in someone too young to have learned how to be afraid. And the quiet smile on her face as she sat back down, that was the look of someone who had just picked up the sword. See, people think legacies are left by giants, but more often, they're carried forward by the ones who were told they were too small. So if you ask me what I hope my legacy is, I won't say it's the speech that went viral. I'll say it's the girl who watched it, the one who cried in the back of the room, the one who looked at power and thought, if she can hold her ground, maybe I can take my first step. And the moment she took it, that was the real victory, because change doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers from a folding chair in a borrowed room, and that whisper, that's the sound of history changing its voice. Some evenings don't need witnesses, no staffers, no phones, no lens to capture it. Just me, walking these stone paths of the Capitol as the sun bleeds gold across the dome. A place that feels too grand and too broken all at once. I used to think power was loud, but these grounds whisper. Every step echoes with a question I can't shake. What if they hadn't spoken? What if the women whose portraits now hang in rooms they were once forbidden to enter had stayed silent? What if the marchers never sang? What if the teacher who smuggled banned books into dusty schoolrooms had decided it was safer to keep her head down? And what if I hadn't? There's a reason I walk this path when no one's watching. It reminds me that most revolutions don't begin with applause. They begin with loneliness. Because the first to speak truth almost always does it alone. They call it ambition. They call it rebellion. Sometimes worse. But the truth is, it's just refusal. Refusal to let lies feel normal. Refusal to let silence be comfortable. Refusal to watch history repeat and do nothing. Tonight, the statues stare like they're waiting. Bronze eyes carved to seem wise, but I wonder how many once looked past the cries of the voiceless. I wonder how many voted to preserve power, not serve justice. But I also wonder about the ghosts history doesn't honor. The ones without names, without marble, but with courage that cracked the floor beneath kings. And it makes me ask myself, will I be worthy of the path I'm walking? Because walking alone is easy to romanticize when you forget how heavy the silence is. But I've learned something. The quietest moments carry the most weight. When no one's cheering, no one's tweeting, no one's clapping, that's when your purpose knocks. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with glory, but with grit. This building wasn't built for people like me. That's not cynicism. It's fact. The halls echo more easily with names like Adams, Jefferson, Madison. Not names like mine, but I'm here. Not by invitation, by insistence. Because somewhere, a girl is watching, and she's wondering if she'll be mocked for raising her hand too high, speaking too fast, or refusing to laugh at a joke that makes her feel small. She needs to see someone walking alone, and walking forward anyway. That's why I keep moving. Because the next generation won't remember the exact words I said, but they'll remember if I stood still when the moment called. And I won't. Not while the steps of giants and ghosts hum beneath my feet. Not while the sunset reminds me that every ending is just light making room for something new. Not while this silence feels like a question still unanswered. Some people think walking alone means no one's with you. But what I've learned is this. Every step taken in truth leaves a path behind. And someone, someday, someone braver, bolder, freer, will follow it. Not to copy, but to go further. So I walk. Not for cameras, not for legacy, but because they did. And if they hadn't, I wouldn't be here. So now it's my turn. To keep walking. To leave light where they left footsteps. To speak when silence tries to settle in. To make sure no girl ever feels alone in the fight to matter. That's the purpose. That's the power. And that, even in the quiet, is how you keep the mic on. It's late. The kind of late where the world feels like it's holding its breath. The windows of the Capitol glow like distant ships. Somewhere, people are still fighting, tweeting, debating, spinning their narratives like webs made to trap truth instead of catch it. But not here, not in this room, where the only sound is the low hum of her laptop and the quiet thud of her heartbeat. She opens the camera. No lighting, no angles, just the lens in her eyes. Tired, yes, but unwavering. And she speaks, not with fire, not with fury, with something sharper, clarity. They'll come for you too, she says, voice even, calm, like truth needs no apology. Not because you're wrong, but because you're different. Because you remind them that they settled, that they stopped asking why, that they got comfortable with comfort. She pauses, then leans forward. Not to intimidate, but to connect. Like she's talking to the one girl sitting alone in a bedroom with posters on the wall and doubt in her chest. Don't flinch, don't beg, don't wait for permission to exist. Stand taller, speak clearer, and if your voice shakes, let it shake loud. Then she stops recording. No dramatic sign-off, no call to action, no hashtags or filters, just her reflection in the screen, blinking back at her. not seeking affirmation, but recognizing something deeper. Resolve. She hovers over the post button for a moment that feels like eternity, then closes the laptop. No one sees the message. No one hears it. And yet, it echoes. Because this is the final word. Not the tweet that goes viral, not the applause in the chamber, not even the headlines she'll never read again, but the choice to speak even when no one may hear it. Because legacy doesn't always show up in trending tabs. Sometimes it hides in the quiet defiance of a woman refusing to shrink. And that stillness, that pause, it screams louder than any rally because it says, I don't need to be seen to be effective. I don't need to be heard to be right. I don't need to win your vote to know I've already won something bigger. Impact. That's the word. Not power, not fame, not even praise. Impact. The kind that lingers long after cameras fade. The kind that reminds the next woman sitting at her own desk in some far-off town that she isn't crazy, she isn't too much, she isn't alone. That strength sometimes looks like softness. That the truest act of courage is not pressing send because you know the message already lives in the way you carry yourself. This wasn't a performance, it wasn't content, it was confession. And in that silence, something monumental settles. A shift, a whisper of a new chapter. Because she knows what most don't. The most powerful voices aren't the loudest. They're the ones that choose when not to speak. So tonight she closes the screen, leans back in the chair, and lets herself breathe. Not because the work is done, but because the wait has been honored. She's not waiting to be remembered. She's making damn sure someone feels seen. And that, without ever saying so, is the most dangerous kind of influence. The kind you don't see coming, the kind that lives in whispers and walks away before applause begins, the kind that, decades later, someone else will describe not as a sound, but as a shift they couldn't name, only feel. She didn't give the final word to the world. She gave it to herself, and that's what makes it final. There's a moment right before you speak when you hear every voice that told you not to. They say, be careful, be quiet, be small. But I wasn't raised for silence. I was raised for truth. And that day, on that floor, I saw the cycle circling again like it always does. He thought he could dismiss me with a label. Liar. That word landed on me like so many others had before. Bossy, angry, dramatic, emotional. They always throw words when they're scared of your facts. He didn't just call me a liar. He called every woman who dared to name a wrong, every student who questioned a system, every voice that cracked under pressure but still kept talking. He called us all liars, and I refused to let that echo pass uncontested. So I answered, not with volume, but with clarity, not with shame, but with receipts. I called him what he was, not a man out of line, but a man in perfect line with a long, tired pattern, a pattern of talking over, of rewriting truth, of punishing dissent. I called him a pattern, and then, in that room, with that mic, with every eye watching and every silence screaming, I broke the damn pattern. That's not drama, that's history. Interrupted, not by noise, but by nerve. Let them write what they want. I've already rewritten what matters, and if they're afraid of what comes next, good. That means the cycle cracked, and something new just walked through. She didn't just speak back, she shattered the script. In her silence there was thunder, and it made me wonder, how often have we swallowed truth just to be safe? Her story isn't just politics, it's personal. It's about reclaiming power, even when the world dares you to shrink. So tell me, when was the last time you stood tall, when staying small would have been easier? Drop your story below. Someone needs it. If this story touched you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to Alexandria Rising Stories, where every voice matters and every story echoes far beyond the screen. This story is a fictionalized and dramatized narrative created for educational, inspirational, and storytelling purposes. While it may be inspired by real public events, people, or societal issues, it includes imagined dialogue, reconstructed scenes, and character interpretations meant to highlight broader themes of justice, dignity, and resilience. Any resemblance to actual events or individuals beyond public knowledge is purely coincidental. We do not intend to defame, mislead, or harm, but to invite reflection and meaningful conversation. Thank you for watching Alexandria Rising Stories.